Welcome to the State of Mind Virtual Speaker Series. This series has been developed to provide education and support to youth, caregivers, and educators during this challenging time. This series is a collaboration between two local nonprofits, 1 in 5 and MindPeace, and various community mental health partners. We're glad you're here to educate yourself and to learn how to keep your brain in a healthy state of mind.
So thank you for joining us tonight for one of the State of Mind speaker series. Tonight we have some special guests with us. We have Stuart Slavin, who is with us, who is a pediatrician who we've been doing some research with here in some Cincinnati schools. Tricia Buchert is the student service manager at Marymount, and Sherwood McVeigh is a parent of some youth here in Cincinnati. So Stuart, I'm going to let you introduce, I already introduced you, but you want to introduce the research that we've done and a little brief outline on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy, for letting me join you today. So I think I'll just say a little bit of introduction in terms of myself and my work. So I'm actually a pediatrician by training and also a medical educator. Most recently was at St. Louis University working with medical students there, was the curriculum dean, and got very interested in mental health of medical students, which is honestly a big problem, and some of you may know about that. And so I ended up doing work there that was very effective in improving the mental health of medical students. But as I was doing that work, one of the things for me, and this is a very kind of personal aspect of this work, is my two daughters were going through high school at the time, and they were suffering, and there's no way around it. And so for me, even though they graduated and are doing well now, I felt really drawn to work on this issue of adolescent and young adult mental health. And because we have a crisis in this country that I'm not sure we're even really wrapping our heads around at this point. And I'm so grateful to 1 in 5 and Nancy and MindPeace that worked with 4 high school districts to administer a survey to kind of find out what was going on in kids' lives in the kind of Cincinnati area. And this really kind of mirrored my work with that I've done in other schools in California and also in Missouri. So probably a dozen schools that I've surveyed at this point. And that's what I'll talk about now, is what the key findings of those surveys were, and then we'll kind of discuss the implications. So the survey really looked at 4 areas. First was just the mental health of the kids, using some excellent screening instruments that have been very well validated. Second is how they spent their day, what kind of activities they were involved in, and how much time they estimated they spent in those. Really importantly, stressors in their life. What did they see as the big stressors? And they had an opportunity to rate how severe those were. And then finally, the one that I got interested in with medical students, but I think is really playing out in high school students, is that I've looked at is mindsets, kind of these mental models that these kids develop. They're not born with them, but that they develop along this kind of educational continuum that actually, in many cases, is likely to be contributing to their distress. So the mental health, the 2 outcomes that we look at is depression and anxiety. And both of those we found relatively high rates. What I can say is some good news, which is they weren't as bad as I've seen in California, where the rates were even higher. But they were mental health outcomes, at least in terms of depression rates, that actually were higher than medical students, and anxiety rates about the same as in medical students. And obviously you would understand medical school is an incredibly high stress experience. So those kind of results are really kind of alarming, especially because they seem much higher than what we see kind of in the national average, where you say 10% of kids are depressed or something like that. We're seeing 3 times that. in schools. And what I should say is that's not a Cincinnati problem. This is a problem. It's not those specific schools. This is going on all over the country. And I think we're remaining a little bit blind to how severe it is. So that's the mental health. And then in terms of their activities, it was really interesting to see. So we asked them about homework, extracurricular activities, sleep, those kind of things. And what we found was on average, the average student was spending about 5 hours outside of school on homework and extracurricular. So you combine that with I have a pinched nerve, and when I win, so I just did that. It's not, it's like, I'm sorry, that just really hurt. I'll try to keep my composure. But if you look at that combined with what school is, 7.5 hours, something like that, or 8 hours, you're talking about days that are easily, 13 hours or more. And then you talk commute times and time to eat and maybe time to relax. And there's just not a lot of hours in the day. And unfortunately, what seems to get shorted for way too many kids is sleep. So what we found, and this was true in California schools, Missouri schools as well, is the average student, 9th to 12th grade, all of this is 9th to 12th grade, the average student was getting less than 7 hours a night. Less than 7 hours a night, when pediatricians are saying you should be getting 9 to 9.5 hours. So you have a sleep deficit that's profound. And it's not like a sleep deficit that adults, this is like, they are at that level, I think, emotionally compromised, and they're actually cognitively compromised. They will not learn as well. So just that amount of sleep is really a problem. And there were kids who were saying, 6 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours on weeknights was what they were getting. So profound sleep deficit. Stressors is where I think it's really fascinating to see what students had to say about what was stressing them out. So we asked them 37 different stressors that ranged from kind of school-related stuff to social stuff, friends and partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, but also families and economic pressures, et cetera. This was all before the pandemic, right before the pandemic. And what was really striking is I'm going to just run through the ones that were the biggest stressors, okay, that they, as a population, that they identified. So number one, or it's actually, I'm going to leave out number one because I think it's interesting. I'm going to come back to that one. But number two and then onward, time pressure, not surprisingly. Pressure to get into a good college, and we can circle back to that. I think that's a big driver of distress people are feeling. Not surprisingly, the amount of material they needed to learn, the amount of homework, fear of failing an exam, fear of not getting all A's. So there's this performance anxiety, which is really profound. Pressure to not disappoint your parents. Interesting. It wasn't pressure from parents directly. It was pressure not to disappoint parents. And now I'll circle back to what was the number one pressure. It was pressure from self. So they're taking all of this external pressure that they're getting from this culture and environment, and they're internalizing it into this enormous weight that dwarfs anything else that we're seeing in this population. That doesn't dwarf, but is the lead stressor for these overall. And then the last area that I mentioned is mindsets. I'm just going to talk briefly about that. But again, I got really interested in this area with medical students. And one in particular is a mindset called maladaptive perfectionism. And kind of maladaptive perfectionism is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's repeatedly setting the bar so high for yourself that you're repeatedly disappointed in yourself. Not disappointed in your performance, disappointed in yourself, who you are. Other things, though, that we looked at, comparison, like how much comparison, were they always looking over their shoulder, not just concerned with their own performance, but how they were performing, not just in school, but extracurricularly, were they getting enough leadership opportunities, all of these different things. There's a huge amount of comparison going on. And we also asked them about emotions related to school, specifically the ones that I've looked at in medical students. Again, were feelings of inadequacy, shame, or guilt, right? And what we found was really intense and strong correlations between all of those and poor mental health. So if you have maladaptive perfectionism, or if you feel inadequate or embarrassed or kind of shame around your performance, you're much more likely to be depressed or anxious, much more. And it's hard to prove causality, but I think that and it actually can circle back and reinforce these feelings. As you get depressed, your thinking tends to get more distorted. But these mental models about how they view themselves and their self-worth and value, I think is likely contributing in really powerful ways to the adverse mental health outcomes that we're seeing. So I think there's an environment component to these mental health outcomes, but there's also this kind of individual personal component that comes from inside the kid as well. The other one, last one that I noted as I was reviewing these, was they were asked how, did they feel overwhelmed academically? And despite only having like 2.5 hours of homework a night, 45% said they felt often overwhelmed. That they felt overwhelmed at an often, and I think another 30% said some of the time. So there's a student population that is feeling stressed to the max, overwhelmed, incredibly tough on themselves. And unfortunately, it's playing out, I think, in many ways with these mental health outcomes that I think we should all be alarmed by. In part, one more thing I'll say is that what worries me about it is some people will go, it's high school, they'll grow up, they'll get past it. But not necessarily. I mean, what we find is if you have depression or anxiety as a teenager, you're much more likely to have it as an adult. And I worry greatly about kind of the mental health problems we're seeing in college, which are profound. And you have mental health resources which are overtaxed, that they can't keep up with the needs of the kids. So, I think we need to really look at this problem and think of different ways that we kind of educate our kids and help them grow up not just to be smart and successful, but to be happy people as well. So I think I'll end there. Nancy, is that a reasonable? You know this data better than me, so I'll ask if did I leave anything out that was critical or?
I think that you hit on all the highlights.
Yeah.
I think we could probably go on for hours about this, and if somebody's interested, they can reach out to 1 in 5 or to Mindpeace, and we can give them more details on that.
Absolutely.
But I want to launch into. I'm going to ask Tricia first. If she has some questions that she wants to ask you about interventions that you might be able to do at schools. So Tricia.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to ask first is just from a district point of view, what kind of culture do you think a district needs to set up in order to even just begin to start working on these, the root cause of this?
Yeah. It's a culture which I think really needs to change. And the key, I think, here is it's the whole community. It's not just the school, it's not just the administration or the teachers. And sometimes I go into communities and that's where they're like, everybody's pointing fingers. The teachers are blaming the helicopter parents and the pressure, and the parents are, blaming the teachers. And I think that's really, and I'm sure you understand this, right? Is no, everybody plays a role. Everybody plays a role. And this is a key thing for me, and I'm going to try not to go too long with this, but this is an important point. I think everybody overall is acting in good faith. They think they're doing what's best for the kid. They're setting themselves up for success. But I think the current path isn't achieving that. Maybe you're getting your kid into a great college, but if they drop out after the first year because they, are overwhelmed or depressed, like that's not a success. If your kid gets into an Ivy League and they're cutting themselves, that's not a success. And so to me, one of the most profound things is I think at the core of this is understanding, and the great book by Frank Bruni, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, really breaks down this myth that this idea that you have to get to the most elite or prestigious or best college possible to find success in life is just wrong. I mean, it's just false. So what we have to do, I think, is that's key, is reducing this unbelievable pressure people are feeling either to get into a really good college or even to go to college. There's some kids who shouldn't go to college right after high school, or maybe not at all. We need to start understanding there are different paths in life that we can support. So to me, it's creating that culture and awareness that what we are doing to our kids right now isn't working. It just isn't. And if anybody wants to argue that with me, I welcome it. If anybody can look at these numbers and defend it. And the last piece, and this is key, is everybody at the med school I worked at and people in high school communities think that if you back off, if you reduce pressure, if you reduce the amount of homework or whatever, that you're actually going to harm performance. And I think it's really unlikely. We backed off at St. Louis U with the medical school. We cut curriculum, we cut time, we freed up time. You know what? Yeah, their mental health improved, but their academic performance did as too. Like if you have people who are sleeping and you're not depressed or anxious, they actually learn better. So there's this false dichotomy that, oh, if we back off or it's too soft, it's a competitive world, our kids will never keep up. No, I don't believe that. I think we can back off and actually preserve great academic outcomes, maybe even better ones than the ones we're seeing. Does that make sense, Tricia? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's changing hearts and minds. I mean, to me, that's the must. We have to convince parents, especially, to not follow this path that they think is like defines what a really good parent is about, right? And it's not. Yeah.
So Sherwood, I'm going to open it up to you as a parent. What do you think about that? How do you have any questions for Dr. Slavin about that same thing?
I do agree with Dr. Slavin that I do put a lot of pressure on myself. I do feel like how clean my kids' clothes are is my responsibility. I believe their health is my responsibility. I believe everything is my responsibility. So even during COVID, I feel like everything, their education is my responsibility. Like, are you on right now? What are you doing? So to that point, I feel like if I let my foot off the gas with the kids, sometimes like it's going to be a reflection on me. Yeah. And sometimes I don't know how to gauge the pressure I need to be putting on the gas. So do you have any help, or how do you gauge that? Like when you know it's too much?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because it's not something I usually talk about or think about that much. But last time I was in Cincinnati, when I spent time with you, Nancy and Susan, and talked to some parents, they really spoke of that parental pressure, and that it started early. Like you have your kid who's like 4 or 5, and somebody's saying like, are they getting soccer lessons? Because like you got to get them on the club team. Like they got, or do you have a math tutor in 6th, when they're 6 years old, so they get into the honors track. So yeah, I think really acknowledging that pressure, because one mom I met at one of the schools was saying like, I was starting to question like, maybe I'm a bad mom because I'm not doing all these things. No, it's like, it's not a race, it's not a competition. And I think that's some of it is being fueled by parents who see others acting this way and go, oh my gosh, my kid is going to fall behind, my kid isn't going to compete. And that's what a good parent looks like. No, I think, again, changing hearts and minds, I think what we got to do is convince people what a really good parent looks like. And it doesn't mean over-parenting. It doesn't mean pushing. Now, the one thing I would say, though, and this is a tricky thing, which is there are some kids who need to be pushed, yeah, right? And especially boys. But I think sometimes the fact that you have to push boys to do their homework is a sign, actually, probably, that the developmental expectation for the amount of homework they are being given is completely inappropriate. And I think their response to say, I don't want to do homework, is actually, a 14-year-old boy is not meant to sit in a chair at school for 8 hours and then come home and do 3 hours more. So they rebel. And there's part of me that says like, I understand that. And then that's the other casualty of what we're seeing you know, we haven't even talked about, we talked about the mental health of you know, the kids. I think the mental health and family life of this deteriorates as well. Because when my daughters weren't doing well, my wife and I were not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because their behavior would fall apart, there'd be more conflict, my daughters would be fighting. So this becomes a real family issue. I think that you know, we don't really talk about, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I don't know, it's hard to find that, especially when everybody else is racing, right?
Right.
You know?
Do you have any, I guess, tips on how to, or questions that we can help our kids through? Like when I want to push on the gas, like, or should I be looking for indicators? Like maybe not right now, she's doing this or this. There's maybe some clues, or, you know, clue me in on
Yeah,
like what I could be looking for in behavior.
It's really hard
Yeah.
to find that balance, because what you have is schools that are assigning a certain amount of homework, or you know, that you know, conscientious kids will do, but others may rebel against, and so you know, their academic performance can drop if they don't do that work. So I mean, I think there's an element of encouraging kids in that process, but not being too overbearing.
Okay.
And like, okay, I'm going to admit something too, or that maybe I like, as a pediatrician and parent and educator, I shouldn't. No, my younger daughter who has ADD, and you know, school wasn't easy. They would sometimes put on pressure at her school, like the academic load, where I just said, you know, where she was falling apart, right? Like the night before. And I said, you know what? Tomorrow's a mental health day. You're not going to school. You're going to catch up on your work because what they're asking of you is unreasonable. So I'm not sure I'm really encouraging others to do that, but I really felt at this point like, no, she's being asked to complete this you know, unrealistic and task, and so we'll say she has a migraine tomorrow. You know, so I don't know, that's you know, that's not hopefully that what we should be doing, right? But yeah.
I think that's really important to understand, is you are responsible to gauging your pace and what you need to be doing. And you're not going to be outpaced by somebody else if you're just taking a breath.
Yeah,
that's really
that's a lovely way of saying it. You know what also happened, and I'd love to ask you both, or well, all three of you. I think what happens too with kids is when our kids start struggling, right? If they have anxiety or depression, or you know, or falling behind academically, we think the problem is with them, you know. But when more than half of the kids have these mental health problems, the problem isn't them, it's what we're asking of them. You know, and I think a lot of parents don't understand that, because you know, you're not going around saying, oh, my kid is like, you know, falling apart or is depressed. That's not what we tend to do unless we have really close friends we can share that with. So everybody's kind of suffering in silence, and you know, and I've seen, and this is, I hope, not going on in the schools there, but in the schools here, sometimes it was like, if your kid got, you know, was having trouble academically, it was, oh, we better do a learning assessment. Oh, we better, you know, look for a learning disability. Oh, they need tutors, rather than asking the question of like, maybe we're asking too much of them at this age, right? I think, and that question needs to be asked, I think, more than it has been.
So what about from a school point of view, what would be like the 3 top like prevention or intervention strategies you would say, kind of to Sherwood's point, like she's asking as a parent, what can we do? So as a school, what would you say? Here are these 3 things. School.
Yeah, I think, you know what, it so mirrors what I did at St. Louis University School of Medicine. A very intense classroom-based curriculum, very hardworking, perfectionistic students, you know, who, like, if you said, like, learn it, they would learn it, and they would learn it all, right? That was their approach to success. Just learn everything, and then I'll do well. So very simple. The first 2 is very simply is cut back. Like everybody cut back, and it's not just the school and homework. It's like extracurriculars. You know, so the people who have like 3-hour drama practices, or basketball, or you know, 2-a-day swimming. You know, I just think we need to look at those and potentially curtail the hours so that kids actually have time just to relax a little bit and sleep. Okay.
Maybe from a parent point of view, like, at a school, you might be recommended for certain AP or honors classes. It doesn't mean you have to take them all. I think as a parent, you have to know your own child and ask, ask your kid, what do you think you can handle? That sort of thing.
And it's interesting because AP, what I found, and with my kids, they took a bunch of APs. There were real differences in just how teachers handled AP. I was in California where one of the schools in the same district, one of the schools in a district had this, I think it was like AP Bio or something, where the guy was proud of assigning 2 hours of homework every night. Okay. There was another AP Bio teacher in another school, same district, who taught AP Bio with no homework. We got to find more of those, right? And so this idea that somehow AP has to have a massive amount of homework with it, I think is a mistake. Yeah. So no, I think it's really correct that kind of parental limits on that. I think saying what's right for my kid and saying, 1 or 2 less, instead of like loading up. Loading up is going to just lead to serious problems, and maybe it'll allow entrance into some, happy, perfect school. But it's if at the expense of the mental health of your kid, I don't think it's worth it. Yeah. So back to your question though, right? So reduce load, right? And honestly, then there has to be some effort by administration to enforce that. Every year, my daughters, every single year in high school, college, there was always one teacher who made their year miserable. While everybody else was playing by the rules, there was one who was just like, just ridiculous amounts of reading that was, oh, here's 50 pages of Beowulf by tomorrow. Those kind of things. Right? And you know what the other that happens when people do that? They start cheating. There's like the California schools, we didn't look at that. It's endemic. If you put too much on kids, they'll resort to cheating. And that's awful too. So cut back. Number 2, short resilience curriculum is giving them some tools to deal with these mindsets. And that's what we did. 2 hours. You can teach kids 2 hours, and then I'd give them support, and I'd have the parents and the teachers and the administration have the same language. So that, if that perfectionism is kicking in, or some of the cognitive distortions, that they're always beating up on themselves and thinking they're terrible and inadequate, having language to help kids themselves and help, the adults in the life also help them, I think is the second. And then the third is really public education, which is this change in hearts and minds about reorienting parents to consider a different way. And that really mirrors my work as a pediatrician, where it was like, I would never tell a parent, just don't do that. I would look at a parenting behavior. I would never say, stop that. You shouldn't do that way, unless it was dangerous, of course, right? But no, I would say, well, what's your goal? What's your goal here? And then I would say, well, with that path, I think these are the risks, and you may not see those risks. And how about thinking about this one? And there will be some parents who say, no, I'm like, no, my kid's going to get straight A's and they're going to go to, Harvard or, wherever. And like, they won't listen. But if it's a bad, but if there's herd immunity, if we can get like 60% of the parents thinking this way, 70%, I think it creates a very different culture. We don't have to change everybody's minds, but we have to get to enough. And I think there are enough parents out there, honestly, that if they knew all of this, they'd say, my God, what are we doing here? Right? But I don't think they're given a clear picture of really what's going on here in a way that they can make good informed decisions. That's it. That's those 3 things. That is literally, I think, if you did those 3 things, I think you'd see incredible change. Mm-hmm. And the work I did at St. Louis U, it cost nothing. We didn't have to come up with some elaborate curriculum around well-being. We didn't have to invest in, hundreds of yoga mats, or, you know, it was like we just we just did those simple things. We didn't need to change how we taught. We just needed to give them some of their time back, you know, and some skills. That was it.
So
Does that
Stuart,
make sense, Tricia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
so Stuart, the one thing that we've talked a lot about is the mindset and some of the work that we want to do here. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what does that look like? What
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that, Nancy. And I'm going to try not to go too long with this, but what I got really interested in is those mindsets, and then something called cognitive distortions, or automatic thoughts, which is, we all have them. This is part of the human condition. And there are things like magnification, which is taking a small event and blowing it up into something really big, or all or none thinking. You know, the kid who gets like an A- or a B+ on an exam, and they consider it a failure. That's all or none thinking. Those are all really predictable kind of distorted ways of thinking that contribute to the distress. And essentially, I think what we really need to do is teach kids at an early age how to examine their own thinking, recognize when it's not accurate, when it's not serving them well, and then giving them tools for how to change it. And a lot of this, what I find really interesting, is it comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is, you know, gold standard treatment for anxiety disorder. It's actually helpful for depression. And interestingly, it's the gold standard treatment for maladaptive perfectionism. But it's my feeling, like, why do we withhold these techniques until you've developed a mental health disorder and need therapy? Like, this should be we have to get way ahead in terms of prevention. And we need to give these kids, who are bright kids, the skills so that they can start, you know, recognizing these mindsets and distortions, and realizing that they can choose to think a different way, that they can choose to think a different way. And man, you know, it was painful in a lot of ways to teach it to medical students, because they were like, oh, I wish I'd seen you like 8 years ago, you know? Like, this would have kept me from suffering a heck of a lot in high school and college. So they're not that difficult. And actually, I think they're much easier to learn if you're not already profoundly depressed. They're much harder to do when you're depressed. So if we can get people early, before they develop these kind of mental illnesses, I think there's real hope. Now, that won't fix it for everybody. And you continue to have really robust mental health resources, you know, that are available for kids who struggle still. But I'm convinced that significant numbers, if we change those environment, I think we would reduce depression and anxiety. And again, sorry I'm going on so long with this one, just to say, I mean, we didn't reduce depression and anxiety a little bit in our students. We reduced it by 80 to 90%, so that they actually finished the first year of medical school with better mental health than when they arrived. So that's that. We're not talking. My goal with the population there of kids would not be, oh, let's see if we can reduce, you know, depression by 5 or 10%. No, we got to cut this in half. We go further, and we will never have enough therapists to do that. You know, right? Yeah, we just won't.
No. All right. Thank you. I have another question from someone online. The question, if your child doesn't play club soccer, then their chance of playing for high school teams is reduced, which can then cause esteem problems and even depression. How do you handle that? How can you help your child understand?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I'm going to struggle with this one a little bit. The other parents can jump in as well on this. Yeah, that may be true, right? That may be the path. But there's also an element, one, that not all kids are great at soccer. And just because you aren't great at soccer doesn't mean you can't find other skills and abilities and talents that you can feel really good about yourself. And one of those things I think it's really important is also separating it. Is your kid the one who really wants to be good at soccer, or is it you that wants them to be good at soccer? And teasing that out is really hard sometimes, right? And it can be both. And so we have to be careful about projecting our hopes and desires for our kids' success onto them in a way that they don't feel pressured by you, but they feel like they might disappoint you. It may be less of a personal esteem, other than feeling like if they don't make the high school team, you are the ones who will be disappointed, right? And I'm not saying that with blame at all. I really don't go to a place of blaming parents. But I think the more we wrap up self-esteem with one pursuit, like you have to find it through soccer or through this or through that, you know, I think you're never going to feel full. You know, okay, then they make the high school team, and then, you know, are they going to hope that they're going to make the, you know, college team? And if, you know, is D3 going to be good enough, or are they really going to want D1 and a scholarship? And then, you know, if they make it there, do they want to go to the Olympics? Right? Like, essentially, you know, at a certain point, our aspirations, you know, meet our abilities and limit how much success we can feel. So I don't know. I'd love any of your thoughts. That's a tough one. That's a really good question, but I don't know. I feel like that wasn't the best of answers.
I think trying to figure out, I think helping your kid to be more self-aware so you can figure out what they want versus what you do. Yeah. And I think that's exactly right, is teasing out. You want your kids to guide you so you can just support what they want, not, I mean, I think that's right, but I think that's really hard to do.
It is.
Because what you said, and it was what was on the survey, right? It's one of the top things. They don't want to disappoint you. So figuring out whether they're just doing it because that's what lots of kids are doing, or that's what they think you want them to do, I think is really, really hard thing. But that's what you want to be able to do. You want your kids to guide you so you can set them up for success, support them in whatever way. And the more self-aware they are, the better they're going to do that.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is, I think, you know, thinking about their success. Again, it isn't, what's hard about it is parents will often go to this place is like, I don't pressure my kid, but they're sponges. Yeah. So they know what your values are. So if you light up about, oh, like soccer teams, you know, this, you know, older kid who's like a star, or, you know, you light up when you hear a kid got into Brown or, you know, Penn or something. Oh my God, that's so great. We're telling them, our kids, what those values are, right? And so that's where we have to be careful. And again, what I really want people to understand is people should have goals and dreams and aspire to greatness, right? I mean, that you don't want to leave behind. You don't want to compromise that. But what you want is this healthy pursuit of excellence, not this unhealthy pursuit of perfection or being best, right? Being best is, medical school was tough because I tell them the first, you know, day, I said, like 90% of you are in the top 10% of everything you've ever done. And I hate to break it to you, but 90% of you are not going to be in the top 10% in med school. You know, at some point you reach that competition where everybody's just as good and smart as you, and you better be ready to face them. And the more you wrap yourself into a sense of my value as a human being, as a person, rather than my performance, that's a place that I want kids to get. That it isn't just the performance, because the performance metrics at a certain point are arbitrary. They're just ones that we choose, right? Whether it's SAT or, you know, other exams.
Just said something really interesting, that performance versus figuring out who you are. And but yet the first thing my kiddos say to me is like, what do I need to do to get into college? What do I need to do? Everybody wants me to tell them what to do all the time. I have to have like a list of things to do for them. Otherwise they sit on the couch or maybe they're playing soccer. I don't know. Yeah. There might be a couple other things that they're doing, but when you said performance versus like what can they do then to maybe discover more about themselves and what?
Yeah, what I told kids, and I will never forget this. This was one of those ones where I met with kids in a California high school. And the most important thing I said is like, find something you love.
Yeah.
Right? Like at least try to find something you love. And these two kids came up to me, these skinny, like, you know, like 92-pound ninth graders, you know, they were these skinny guys. And they came up to me afterwards and they said, Dr. Slavin, is like robotics okay? I go, yeah. And they were like, oh yeah. You know, the more you can align your passion with something you want to do, you know, and the less they do about burnishing their CV with 20 different things, and instead develop one or two things that they really care about. That's what colleges are looking for anyway. They're not looking for generalists who've done like, you know, 12 clubs and president of 5, you know, and of different things. I mean, there are a lot of kids who do that, but I think what they're really looking for is depth a lot of time. So I think you can actually marry like things like that. Like, no, don't feel like you have to knock yourself out with a bunch of activities. Find things you care about, find things you enjoy, and dive deep into those. I think that's the best place to be, you know?
Yep. Okay, we have another question. Do you feel social media is the major problem causing anxiety in teens? I already know the answer.
Yeah, and that's one of the things which, this is my belief, and I think it's supported by the research. And there are a lot of researchers out there, and I think they're wrong. I just say flat out wrong, that they think social media is the primary driver of this. That is not what we're finding in our surveys. It's school and it's school culture that's driving this, okay? And social media is actually one of the lowest rated stressors. Cyberbullying, one of the lowest rated stressors if you look at the population. Yes, there are individual students who are feeling targeted. It exists. There is cyberbullying, and for those individual kids, it's a problem. But if you look at the whole population, it's not a main driver. But what I think it is, and I spoke with kids in California about this, is they say where they see it is it's an amplifier of all of this competition stuff. You know, so it's like they're on social media, you know, saying what they just got on this quiz or exam or, you know, et cetera, you know, or where, you know, social media, oh, I got into this college and that college, and they're like, you know, big events for reveals, and like we've taken this academic pursuit and it's built up on steroids on social media. But I think that's, well, other thing I'll say, I think social media, this is a hypothesis, not proven, I think is a response in which kids feel almost no time to connect with each other in real life. Right before pandemic, is you didn't have time to like hang out with friends. I mean, when I was in high school, like we had an hour of homework maybe. Like we'd ride bikes and, you know, play street hockey and like, so I think there's an innate human need for connection. And if we don't create space for them to do that in their daily lives, yeah, of course they're going to do it on social media. Like they have to have that, right? And the other piece why I think it's, if you say it's social media and it's not school, what happens in the summer? You know, look at your own kids. If they're a heck of a lot happier and less stressed, but still on social media, still doing their video games, still doing Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is, and the variable that's disappeared is school, you know, I think that speaks volumes. Nancy, it's one of the things I'd love to do at some point is I'd love to survey kids during the summer.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we would see much lower depression, much lower. And I think parents have experienced that.
Right.
My kids were happier people during the summer, you know? And it shouldn't be that way. I mean, really, school should be joyous. Learning should be joyous. And we're crushing the joy out of it. That's the other thing. Sorry to go on, but this one, my older daughter didn't read a book for pleasure for 3 years after high school. Like, that's a horrible outcome. Because she saw reading as a chore. She saw it as an assignment. No, like, let's not kill their curiosity in the process, right? So let's encourage it.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder what role social media plays even with the parents in terms of the competition and
Yes,
right.
it is. Yes, no, Tricia, that's so true. I think it is. We're all part of this. And you know what? Another thing, and this is maybe goes back to what Sherwood you were talking about, is a lot of parents these days are pretty, like the stuff I was talking about, this is like parents can be this way too. Perfectionistic, competitive, you know, hard driving, chasing success, you know? And so we have to be careful about that role modeling of working ridiculous hours and coming home late or not being available, you know? And I was there. I mean, like, so when I'm not calling anybody out, like this was like, that was me in my past. And it sent a message to my kids that I think was really dangerous, you know, is like, you know, we all need to try and slow down in some kind of way. Other things?
Other questions?
Sorry, I was just slowing down. Sorry.
Yeah, it's good. I feel like I've been like, I was getting a little too excited too. I should bring my voice. Like, it's funny because then when I talk about this stuff, man, I have like, there's a passion I feel for this, you know, because partly for me, I feel like what we're doing is just so dangerous, and the numbers speak for themselves. And I really do. What I would love to see, and Nancy and I have talked about, I don't really see anybody in the country. This is the piece that's kind of distressing to me. I don't see any communities really addressing this.
We're going to do it. We're going to change it.
Exactly. And Cincinnati's going to lead the way.
We're going to lead the way.
It's not going to be the East Coast. It's not going to be the West Coast. It's going to come from the heartland. And
yes.
we're going to be, right? I mean, we should. We should. And I think we need a movement that would build across this country. This was a problem that used to exist just in the coasts, I think. It used to just, you know, exist in the more elite public and private schools. This is spread. It's spread all over the place. I don't think it necessarily occurs in the really underserved rural and urban schools, where I think sometimes the expectations in some of those schools are too low rather than too high. You know, so this isn't like, in reality, we have a two-tier system, educational system in this country. And what I'm talking about is the upper tier in all reality. But what that upper tier, I'm seeing it in suburbs all over St. Louis, as I traveled all over the country giving talks to medical school faculty. Everywhere I went, parents were saying, you've described our school. You've described my kids. And the other place it's spread, it's not just spread geographically, I think, over the last 10 years. It's spread earlier and earlier. And Nancy, I got that more from my visit to Cincinnati, talking with teachers, talking with parents, is they said, I'm seeing 7-year-olds, I'm seeing second graders who are freaking out because they got to be on a quiz.
Yep.
You know, and so this is moving earlier. And I think some of it really goes to that pressure, right? The parents are feeling that then they're exerting on the kids because they don't want them to fall behind. And I honor that sentiment. I do. That motivation comes from a good place. But when we're all doing that, you know, it's a competition that ultimately, like, I guess everybody loses.
Right.
So how young can we start teaching, you know, the cognitive behavioral therapy skills?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna start the answer by saying I don't know. I really don't know, and it's an interesting question. Could you? I think there it's maybe more important that the parents and the teachers develop the language so that they can start shaping their kids. That if they start, feeling like I'm not a good person or I'm worthless if I don't get a score, that we can help parents find the language when it's a 6 or 7-year-old. And the teachers can work with those kids to reshape those beliefs, right? And there are some kids, some of this is temperament. I mean, some of this, like kids,
Yeah.
the way that some kids, and I'm sure you see this, Tricia, is that there are some kids who are just of a nature that they're more susceptible to this, and especially girls. The gender differences, I think, can be profound, where the girls are always trying to please. Okay, I'll jump that hurdle, just just show me where it is and I'll do it. Where at a certain point, I think the boys, some of them just give up. And that creates a whole thing. If you give up, what happens? You start to get involved in risk-taking behaviors. If you're failing, sometimes it feels better not to try than to actually try and not do well. So that's a whole group that I worry about as well, as how boys may react to this and engaging in risk-taking behaviors and becoming disconnected and developing this narrative that you're a failure, you're not a good kid, in conflict with the parents. So, I'm not saying all of that is on this kind of academic milieu, but the more we set it up where our expectations exceed their capacity to do it, I think that is a potential outgrowth of this, which should scare us all, right? I mean, that's another piece. I mean, we haven't even talked about, the school shootings that everybody's so frightened on,
With my kiddos, I've had a great relationship with my pediatrician, and I think that has been really helpful, having really candid conversations with her about my 4 kids. But then also with a teacher, I do have to say that my son's 3rd grade teacher, I was really worried about how he was reading, how he was developing in class, and that he had a lot of, outbursts and this and that. It's 3rd grade, right? But she pulled me aside because I was worried, and we were having conversations, and I felt like I needed to put on more pressure, and what can I do? And he's 3rd grade.
Yeah.
She's like, Sherwood. She looked at me and it was very candid and a very caring and concerned way. She was like, he is an empathetic, loving young man. He will do a lot of good in his life. I would not worry about him. I was like, you're right. And it was like, calmed me down and refocused me with him too. So the teacher, which I love her, but so she was really great with my little O man. So you're right.
And I don't know. Yeah. And one thing, and I don't know if this is a generalization, which is fair, but some of it was, and it's anecdote in some way. I have no studies to support this, but back in Los Angeles, I was a faculty member at UCLA and had a practice, and I was there for 21 years, so I saw families over that span of time, and you know what? I think this is one which, I think was accurate, and it's not 100%, but I think when you also find women who've been successful in their career, that are either professionals in some sense, either have a graduate degree or are moving up through business. I think for those women, there was a drive to kind of manage their kids' success in the way they approached work. And the idea of just backing off, or no, we manage problems. We fix those, right? Is a really understandable orientation to have. And it can serve you well, but almost like any behavior, if it goes too far, it can actually be counterproductive.
Right.
Right. And that teacher gave you, wow, what beautiful,
Yeah.
what beautiful work.
She had to redirect me.
Yeah, right. It was like you were the one who needed the help more than him, right?
That was
You
great.
know?
But
Yeah.
it's all of us. And I think it's
Yes.
recognizing the behavior and seeing what your kiddos are going through, what I'm going through, and calling a spade, like, and how can we do this better?
Yeah.
This.
Yeah. And doing it without blame. I mean, if I ever, and Nancy knows this, blame and pointing fingers doesn't help.
Anything.
You know, it's only if we can kind of move collaboratively and work collaboratively that we can actually make a difference here. There are no villains. There are no bad actors. Well, some of my kids' teachers, there were a few bad actors, I've got to say. But no, most of them weren't. Most of them really were just good people who were, I think, misguided in the approaches they were taking, you know? And I think as a community, everybody needs to come together and say, we've got to solve this together, right?
I think everybody has their own pressures. If you
Yes.
take an AP course, there's pressure on you to make sure the students pass, and not just pass, but pass at a higher level. So everybody's got, whether you're the teacher, the administrator, the parent, everyone has their own pressure.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what it is, though, Tricia, I think is an interesting thing, and this will never get approved, but it's the metrics we use, though, right? So we have the metrics. So, what's the average SAT score, and what are the ACT scores, and what percentage of kids are going to college, and what, percent of kids are getting into these elite schools, right? Those are the metrics we look at. I'd love to throw the metrics of mental health into it,
Yeah.
Let's see how we're doing on that metric and give it some balance, right? Because if you just focus on those metrics, it can look really pretty good, but at what price?
Yeah.
And what I'm into the idea is, no, I mean, this is one of those ones where we showed at St. Louis U, like, you can have it all. You care about those metrics? I'll deliver those too. You care about your kids' SAT scores? We can deliver those too. But it isn't through applying maximal pressure from the day they arrive to, the day they finish high school. Those, it may look like we have to amp up, put pressure, add more homework to stay competitive, but I'm absolutely convinced that's not the right answer. And because basically, just a quick point is that there is no human endeavor, none, that you can come up with where adding more leads to ever greater outcomes, right? At some point, right, like you could say, 23 hours of work a day is not going to be a good place for our kids academically, right? If they're only getting an hour's sleep, everybody would agree to that. So the only question is, where's that sweet spot? And I think what's so telling, we're over pressuring kids because they're not even getting enough sleep to function at their best. But, if there isn't a marker there that tells us something is wrong, and that's why I think it's not just mental health problems that is probably harming their performance. Their academic performance is probably being, suppressed by just a sleep deprivation. So that's the other, and that's where I'd love this, again, with Cincinnati schools, do this stuff and let's see if they still get into great colleges and their SAT scores are just as good. And, so it's one of those things we sometimes put into this bucket. Oh, we either have to care about their mental health or we have to care about their success and that they're in competition. No, you got to marry those two together and say, no, you can get into this sweet spot where actually both can be achieved. And that's what we got at St. Louis U, where it wasn't kids just avoiding or students avoiding depression or anxiety. They were thriving. They were flourishing. There was joy in learning, So I think it's possible. I really do.
Beautiful, wonderful thing if we could do that.
Yes.
Well, we're at 8:01. So I don't want to take up anybody else's time here, I don't think. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. I know that Dr. Slavin, we're going to continue to have this conversation. We're going to be doing another webinar we're going to be having some youth that is going to actually be having the conversation with us. So
Yeah,
I
which
look
will be
forward
fun.
to that. That'll be very fun. We're going to do that on isn't it November the 11th, November the 10th, which is
Cool.
this date? Which is it?
I don't know. Don't look to me. Definitely don't look to me. And as you look, if you're going to try and look, Nancy, let me just thank Trisha and Sherwood. This was so much better to, rather than just give a talk, to just get into dialogue and hear where you're at. And yeah, so thank you for joining tonight too.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please jump in with us and start this conversation at your school. So
Absolutely.
thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, everyone. This is good.
A special thank you to our State of Mind speakers and to you for joining us. More videos and educational resources can be found at 1 in 5's website. If you feel like you or your child is in need of professional support, therapists are available. Please refer to Mindpiece's school-based or community resource page. For a mental health crisis or emergencies, patients and families are encouraged to contact their current mental health provider first. This allows the mental health provider who knows your child best to provide support and direction. If your child does not have a mental health provider and they are experiencing a non-life-threatening mental health crisis, you are encouraged to contact the Psychiatric Intake Response Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. 513-636-4124. Call 911 or go to the emergency department if you are experiencing a medical emergency, a life-threatening mental health crisis, or are directed to go there by a medical provider. This will help limit the spread of COVID-19 in our community and allow our emergency departments to care for patients with the most critical needs first.